So in this lecture, we're going to talk about price discrimination. In the first video, I'm going to give a brief overview about price discrimination and the different types. And then in the subsequent videos, we'll go over the details of each type. Okay, so first of all, what is price discrimination? Well, so far in this class, we've assumed that every consumer ends up paying the same price for an item, right? The firm sets a price, it's the same price to everyone. In this lecture, we're going to take a step back and say, well, maybe the firm might be able to figure out which consumers are willing to pay more than others, right? They might know which consumers are sort of at the higher portion of the inverse demand curve with higher willingness to pay, and they might try and charge those consumers higher prices than the firm charges other consumers. Okay? Now, so for it to be price discrimination, it has to be based on their willingness to pay, not based on cost. So for example, if firms charge different consumers different prices, but shipping is included in the price and the price difference merely reflects a difference in shipping costs. For example, suppose people in Alaska pay higher prices because it costs more to ship it to them. If the price difference merely reflects the shipping cost difference, then it's not price discrimination. Similarly, if a firm offers different options, so some with higher or lower quantities, think of like a small box of cereal and a larger box of cereal, or offers different options of different qualities, and the difference in prices of these different options merely reflects the difference in costs of producing them, then that would not be price discrimination. Although this is somewhat confusing because oftentimes when you do see quantity discounts or something like that, it actually is more based on their willingness to pay and trying to extract as much revenue as possible from consumers rather than some sort of a cost difference. So usually, actually, when you see quantity or quality discounts, it would be a example of price discrimination. Okay, so what are the requirements for a firm to price discriminate? Well, there's three main requirements. First, firms must have market power. Usually think of something close to a monopoly firm as the one who is price discriminating. Why? Well, if they don't have market power, suppose it's a perfectly competitive market and a firm tries to charge a price that's higher to some consumer. Remember, the assumption of a perfectly competitive market is that firms are price takers. So if they try to charge a higher price to any one consumer, some other firm will step in and try and undercut that price to steal that sale. Okay, the second assumption is there can't be any easy resale or arbitrage. Right? Suppose that they're trying to charge me a high price and you, the students, a low price. That would be undermined if I could just ask you to go to the store to buy it with your student ID and then, pass it on to me for the same price that you paid. Okay, so arbitrage will undermine price discrimination. And lastly, firms must have a way to segment consumers. They must have some way to charge people with higher willingness to pay higher prices and people with lower willingness to pay lower prices. And there's actually two ways they could do this. The most obvious way is direct price discrimination, where a firm explicitly charges different consumers different prices for the same item. Right? Think of like a standard item, a standard widget. They might sell the widget to one person for a higher price and another person to a lower price. But there's also a second way. They could use something called indirect price discrimination, and that goes back to those quantity or quality discounts that I was referring to. So maybe they don't explicitly charge one person a higher price than another consumer, but they offer a menu of options. They offer the same menu of options to all consumers. And consumers might self-select into their options based on how much they like the product, and they might end up paying different net prices for the same item if you divide by the quantity. Okay? I still go over this. I think the lines are blurring somewhat, but this is a very popular sort of slightly more detailed classification. Pigos Classification of 1920 in his book, and it's often cited, so it's worth quickly covering. He defines three different types of price discrimination. First degree price discrimination, which is personalized pricing. Essentially, everyone gets a different price. In his classification, he talked about perfect first degree price discrimination, which is usually what people think about when they think about first degree price discrimination. Under perfect first degree price discrimination, it is assumed that the firm knows exactly how much each person is willing to pay for the item, and the firm charges them their exact full willingness to pay. Okay, that's not really realistic. Can't think of any examples of that. Even imperfect first-degree price discrimination, where the firm might have some idea about how much each person is willing to pay, but it's not exact, and they end up charging people different prices, but not their full willingness to pay. Even that second example of imperfect first-degree price discrimination is still pretty rare, although it's, at least historically, We will be talking more about that a little later in this lecture and in the in-class lecture. Okay, so the second type of price discrimination that he talks about is second degree, which is basically the same thing as indirect price discrimination, either quantity or quality discounts or some sort of menu pricing. And the third type is third degree price discrimination, where they're not charging each person a different price, but they're charging easily identifiable groups. Okay, so let me give a few examples of each. First, imperfect first degree price discrimination. There really aren't many examples, but maybe one of the best is college tuition. Consumers are offered different prices. Basically, some consumers get more student aid or discounts on tuition. And sometimes this reflects their ability to pay, but that actually is an example of price discrimination. If some consumers have higher income, presumably they'd be willing to pay more, all else equal. And why can colleges actually do this? Because in order to apply for financial aid, you need to actually submit accurate information about your family's income. Right? And so they actually have a very useful piece of information when trying to decide how much to offer you as a tuition price. In a lot of other contexts, consumers wouldn't reveal that information. Like if you're a person who would be willing to pay a lot, you would go at great lengths not to reveal that to a firm, because if you did reveal that to a firm, they would just charge you a higher price. That's why it's usually quite difficult for firms to first degree price discriminate. Second degree price discrimination is either quantity or quality discounts. Here's another example. This was from T-Mobile. It's a little bit dated, but it was several different data plans on a mobile for mobile phones. You can see that the first gigabyte of data you could get for $50 a month, so it's $50 per gigabyte. If you were instead to buy 2 gigabytes, it's $60 in total, or $30 per gigabyte. If you were to buy 4 gigabytes, it would be $70 in total, which is 70 divided by 4, even a lower price per gigabyte there. So people end up paying different prices per gigabyte of data. And for third degree price discrimination, the best example probably for this class is student discounts. You probably can show your university ID at the at the local movie theater or something like that and get a lower price than other people. Except for me, because I still show my little faculty ID and I just put my thumb over the faculty part. So those are a number of different types of price discrimination. In the next few videos, we're going to go over these in a little bit more detail.